So, what does the Lord require of you? Well, the prophet Micah spells it out so eloquently that his words have become perhaps the most recited words in the Old Testament after Psalm 23. Now, most scholars agree that Micah preached in Jerusalem at the end of Israel's glory days, when there had been about 40 years of relative peace and prosperity. But as the good times rolled on, God's people had started to forget who they were and whose they were. They forgot that they were once oppressed slaves and that God had brought them out of slavery in Egypt. They forgot that God had guided them and provided for them when they were lost and had nothing. They had forgotten that God had given them the very land they were living on and prospering on that allowed them to grow. And Micah sees trouble looming ahead as other nations gain strength and as God's people become more complacent with their lives. Micah warns what will happen and reminds people that they must refocus their time and their energy and their priorities toward God's ways, that they must remember that God has already shown them how to live faithfully and fully, and they must do as God requires according to the covenant they have with God. So what does the Lord require of you? You know, a better translation of this classic question is actually more like this: what does the Lord look for in you? What does the Lord look for? That's probably more accurate in Hebrew. And Micah's answer is so pithy and so succinct and so to the point that it's no wonder that many Christians lift it up alongside with Jesus' commandment to love God and love neighbor as yourself. It's that much well known. And you see, Micah says, you know what God is looking for. God is looking for you, dear people, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. How God's people needed to hear that sermon and be called back to the way of life that God intended for the world, a way of life called shalom, and how we need to hear that same message today. You know, God is calling God's people to do justice. Now, in the Bible, the word justice, or mishpat, is used many, many times. It's one of the major themes of the Bible. And every time it's used along with one of 9 other words. These other words that accompany the word justice are these: widow, fatherless, orphan, hungry, poor, stranger, needy, weak, oppressed. These are the folks with no social, economic, or political power and no way ever to experience the kind of shalom that God intends for them. And so doing justice has to do with making things fair so that all God's children can know shalom. The problem is that we often think of shalom as a way of life where all are to be treated equally. We're all equal, aren't we? But in God's shalom, all are to be treated justly. You see, in God's shalom, equality and justice are not the same. Some powerful images you might have seen are all over the internet that illustrate the difference between equality and justice. And so quite appropriately, for this week at least, the setting of these illustrations is outside a baseball field where 3 people are standing behind a fence at the edge of the outfield trying to peer over to watch the game. In the first image, titled reality, we see that the first person is tall enough to see the game just fine. The second person can barely see over the fence, only if she stands on her tippy toes and maybe jumps a little bit. The third person is really short and can see nothing but fence right in front of their face. Now, in this illustration, we see 3 wooden crates stacked next to them. Then we come to the second image. This one is labeled equality. And in this image, each person has a benefit of standing on one of those crates. The tallest one standing on a crate still towers over the other ones and sees the field very well and has an excellent chance of catching that home run. The middle one can now see easily the things going on in the field without standing on her tiptoes. But the third one, even standing on that crate, can't see over the fence. And so we move to the third image, and this one is labeled justice. In this image, someone has changed around those crates. And now the tallest one is watching the game, but there's no crate under the feet. The middle one is also watching the game, standing on one crate. And the shortest one is also watching the game for the very first time and standing on 2 crates. Justice has been accomplished, and all 3 are cheering wildly for their team, and some of us know what that feels like, don't we? To do God's justice means first to notice the ones who, often through no fault of their own, are not getting a fair shake at life. And then it is to do what it takes to change the situation so that all can cheer at what life offers them and all God's people. And you know, the Lord looks to us. The Lord relies on us to do that kind of justice in this world, even if we have to change out and give up our own crate. To love kindness. In Hebrew, that word is hesed. It's a great word. We are to love hesed. You see, hesed encompasses way more than just kindness. It encompasses the notions of compassion and sympathy and gentleness and benevolence and helpfulness, steadfast love, mercy, charity. Hesed is about steadfast, persistent, and unrelenting love that goes beyond reasonable things, even random acts of kindness. It goes beyond kindness, even though kindness will be a very good place to start in this day and age when there is such a shortage of any kind of kindness. God is looking for people of faith not just to do hesed, not just to do kindness. God is looking for God's people to love hesed, even when there's no expectation that it will be acknowledged or appreciated or returned. Perhaps Mother Teresa, now Saint Teresa, best embodies this modern understanding of what it means to love hesed, to love kindness. Our hymnal has a beautiful quote taken from one of her writings. It's number 473. It's titled, "Be God's Kindness." Listen to what she says. Be the living expression of God's kindness. Kindness in your face, kindness in your eyes, kindness in your smile, kindness in your warm greeting. In the slums, we are the light of God's kindness to the poor, to the children, to the poor, to all who suffer and are lonely. Always give a happy smile. Give them not only your care, but your heart. Although I'm always moved by St. Teresa's Hesed, as your pastor, I'm also deeply moved by the way you practice Hesed. You know, when you choose to get up early Sunday after Sunday to cook and serve breakfast, to listen deeply to other stories, to clean up afterwards and not expect anything in return, that's Hesed. When you shop for food that will feed someone you might never meet, when you send a note of encouragement or spend some extra moments listening to someone's story or let a child know that you remember their name, that's Hesed. When you welcome a stranger, hammer a nail that's not in your house, offer your midnight hours so someone else can sleep in warmth and safety, when you tithe your income out of love for God, that's what it means to love Hesed, to love kindness. Hesed oozes out of this place. You know, and no, it doesn't even ooze, it flows, and I hope you know it. And as it flows, it blesses and encourages and uplifts God's people everywhere. It's a sight to behold. God looks to God's people. God looks to us to love Hesed. And God also looks to God's people to walk humbly with God. Walking humbly with God is what sets people of faith apart from those who don't base their works in faith. We who have faith in God through Christ believe that we don't walk through life alone. We believe that there is someone who walks with us, who guides us, supports us, sometimes carries us, that there is someone who empowers us to be the people in this world, to do justice, to love Hesed, to share the good news of God's steadfast love. You know, to walk humbly with God implies a slow, measurable, intentional, deliberate journey in which we remember that we don't have a prayer of doing justice or loving well without God's help. To walk humbly with God means that we are not full of ourselves. It means that we can make more room for God and for others. And that's exactly what a saint by the name of Carolyn Junker did. Perhaps you remember her. Church had always been important to Carolyn, so her humble walk with God included all those things that you might imagine: Bible study, prayer, weekly worship, the choir, women's groups, simply showing up when something was going on at church. Her walk with God also included an intentional act of service. Each and every week, thank you, by the way, Kate, appreciate that. Each and every week, Carolyn, who happens to be Holly Biddle's mother, met a young mother at the library and tutored her as she prepared to take her GED. Truth be told, Carolyn spent more time waiting for this young woman to show up than she did tutoring. Carolyn spent more time listening to this young woman and encouraging her than she did with the GED material. But then one day, right in the middle of the session, this young woman stopped abruptly and looked Carolyn straight in the eye, and she said, "Why do you even bother wasting so much time on me? And why are you so nice when you don't have to be?" Well, her question stopped Carolyn in her tracks. She had never been asked that question directly, but deep down, she knew the answer. It was her intentional walk with Jesus that had led her to treat everyone as a beloved and precious child of God. And it was her lifelong walk with God that had given her the patience and wisdom and compassion and desire to serve without regard to herself. Why? The woman asked again. Well, Carolyn said, I suppose it's because I'm a Christian. To which the woman smiled and replied, wow, I've never known a Christian like you. God is looking for people of faith to walk humbly with God. So there we have it. Do justice. Love kindness. I still like that word chesed better, to walk humbly with God. That's what saints of God do. That's what God is looking for in God's people. Has God found that in you? Has God found that in us? Well, the good news is that much of what God is looking for can indeed be found right here among you, among us, among the ministries that this church is engaged in. Ministries of justice and service and compassion and spiritual growth and welcome and walking humbly. The materials in the packet you received recently in this past week in the mail confirms what I already know, that you are an amazing congregation who knows what God is looking for in this world and among God's people. You are a congregation who responds in faith and in justice, acts of justice and kindness, and I am humbled to serve as your pastor. You know, next year is filled with promise. We will celebrate as this beautiful building turns 100 years old. We will mobilize around a faithful and compelling future story. We will continue to grow in faith as we serve and share, worship and work, play and pray, connect with one another and with God and God's people. Today, all of us are being asked to consider how our giving plays into who we are, how our giving will make a difference not only in our own walk as individuals with God, but in how God's shalom, God's justice and hesed is being lived out and shared not only in this church, but in this community and beyond these doors into the world. I invite you for just a moment to open up the insert that's in your bulletin. It looks like this. And especially I want you to look at the side that has the green on it, because what this is a chart, and it can help you visualize your monthly giving as you think and pray about what God is looking for in you. So you begin by finding your approximate monthly income on the left, or if it's not on there, adding that in. And then you move over to find your current level of monthly giving. So, what is your percentage that you currently give? You don't have to tell me, this is just for you. I don't want to know. Okay. And in your time of reflection and prayer that we'll offer in just a moment, I want you to ask God in prayer what it would take to raise your giving level to the next percentage point. Just 1 percentage point, maybe 2. In prayer, ask. And the scripture promises you will receive an answer. I want you to trust me on this. Your giving makes all the difference in the world. because it impacts not only your personal relationship with God, but it impacts the witness and ministry of Christ's church in the world. Now, I don't know how much each of you gives, but I do know how much God has given to you, to me, to us, and my goodness, we worship a generous God. I don't know what your income is, but I do believe that everything I have, everything we have, belongs to God, and that giving a portion of it back to God for God's work does as much for my own life as it does for the world. I don't know what you give, but I do know from my own experience that it is true, absolutely true, that great joy happens when you give until it doesn't hurt anymore. Now, many of you brought your giving cards with you today. And if you didn't bring one, there should be some in your pews around you. If you forgot to bring one, just tap the person there and find that, or raise your hand and we'll get one to you. Because what's going to happen is we're going to be given opportunity to fill it out just now. But before you do, I invite you to pray and listen to the anthem that the choir will sing. And ponder what God is looking for in you. Let the words and the music guide you as you record on your giving card your commitment to giving to God, to the glory of God in the coming year. And during the second to the last verse of this anthem, the deacons are going to receive your giving cards, along with your regular tithes and offerings. And what a celebration it is to be able to give. May this time in our worship be one of joyful commitment, faithful dedication, and true consecration of all that God has given. Amen.